Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ben Henderson. I'm a senior technical specialist in the Health and Life Sciences organization. And today I am joined by Ed Bailey, Principal Technical Evangelist with Cribl. Ed, how you doing today?
Doing great. Really appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm excited to hear everything that you've been doing out in the field in relation to SIEM migrations, data analytics, getting a hold of your data estate. I focus on security, so of course the SIEM discussion is relevant to me. What about you? What are you seeing out there in relation to migrations today with the amazing Cribl platform that we have
I gotta
going
say,
in
lots
partnership
have
with
changed.
Microsoft? Oh,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
bet, man.
the fundamental theme is change. I think companies, I think users, your SOC managers, they want more. They want access to better data. They want access to more efficient analytics. And I mean, companies are finally saying, you know what, we are not getting what we need, and we need to find new answers.
Yeah, I'm seeing that as well. Really focusing on what data is relevant from a security perspective, how to very, very quickly percolate up that very, very pertinent, enriched data that can be tied to an alert and then take action on that enriched data. But of course, customers are having a problem really seeing their entire data estate. Are you seeing that with your activity?
It's a huge issue. We go into organizations, and data's everywhere. And also, I think due to cost issues with traditional SIM platforms, they're having to make a lot of uncomfortable compromises to say we can't consume this data, we can't analyze data due to cost issues. And so, I spent an awful lot of time just thinking through, what do you need, what do you don't need, where can we use data lake concepts, where can we use, modern analytics concepts to get teams access to the data they need and control costs at the same time. It's really been interesting, and it's a very exciting time because I think that's what attracted me to Cribl is just that ability to get what I need and better data, but also less data. And it was just it's an interesting conundrum.
It is, it really goes to the old axiom work smarter, not harder, really being targeted in what we need to do. You and I have come up through the trenches together. Ed and I have worked together in the past, and, we've seen a lot of that incompatibility from a data perspective, a parsing perspective. How do you even just get the data where it needs to go? What are you seeing today with customers really looking to get a hold of their data estate? We have an amazing partnership with Cribl and Microsoft, which is helping making that easier and easier for Microsoft customers. Could you tell me a little bit, maybe an experience in the trenches of what you've seen customers migrating to Microsoft Sentinel?
Oh, sure. I mean, and so there's two big primary use cases where, for example, so the one I see an awful lot, companies say, "Hey, we have an E5 license with O365, so we want to take advantage, but we also have an external SIM." Very common that say they're going to roll out Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Server because of the E5 license, and they're going to digest Azure data into Sentinel, and then they're going to use Sentinel as a way to then, because of all the really, really good machine learning that's built into Sentinel, to say create alerts and then send those alerts over into their central SIM. And so that way the team gets the benefits of all the learning and all the instrumentation that Microsoft provides almost by default in their traditional SIM, but also then we're going to migrate away from our SIM over to Sentinel. And so this creates a lot of struggles for teams because they need to bring enormous amounts of external data into Sentinel, and also just and then here's the big thing that how do you do this by minimizing disruption? Very, very common for enterprises to get into a SIM migration, but degrade their security posture. This is something that really worries a lot of CISOs because we're spending all this time moving data around. Are we still getting value from our existing SIM while we move? And so that's a big value prop for Cribl because we can take the entire production data set, we can clone it. And so the entire production data set goes to the legacy SIM. The clone of that data is now going over into Sentinel. And so now they can then migrate their content into Sentinel. They can test their alerts. Imagine that you have your old SIM, your new SIM, and you can see, did this alert work in our legacy SIM, and did it work in our new SIM? And so now you
Right.
can do A/B comparisons. You can compare your dashboards. Are we seeing the same things? So now you can have that cutover conversation, knowing that at the very minimum, Sentinel is doing exactly what our legacy SIM is doing. And I think that sense of safety is very, very important. I mean, you've been doing this for years. I mean, just from a risk management standpoint, I mean, I would think that would make you feel better about making a big change.
It absolutely would. I mean, and in this day and age, we're going to have, I believe, and I'm seeing more customers really looking at that redundancy, going back to fundamentals of how do you provide, resiliency of your data
Right.
without breaking the bank. As a security practitioner, which is our, you and I, that's our true north, really, on how do we make sure our customers are secure and have the visibility that they need. I am an advocate for using data as needed. So, a lot of my customers today, they have, three main issues that I'm seeing. They have compliance issues where they need to make sure they have their PCI. They make sure they have analytics issues where they want business intelligence. They want to feed that data into AI. And as you and I know, it's the best data in equals the best data out, right? Junk in, junk out. Just like junk food, right? And then lastly, the actual security data. What's the security events that have been correlated? Have you seen that out of the industry, that people are really kind of thinking of their data in different ways and applying those differently?
Well, this is, and you just that's you set up my next comment perfectly, and this is where we start having the conversations with customers about how they're going to use their tools. And the most common thing we do is start recommending decoupling use cases. So, for example, start maintaining your retention and compliance in Azure Blob, and so in our Azure Data Lake. So now your data is in a vendor neutral format. It's external. It's in the cheapest place possible. And Cribl has this fun thing called Replay, which allows you to have a visual browser to go into your object storage, find the data you want, and put it back into anything. And why I love that so much is you're not restricted to just your SIEM. You could put that data anywhere. And this is where, from an analytics standpoint, Azure Data Explorer becomes really, really interesting. So what we'll do is we'll push data over into Sentinel for detection use cases. We'll send bulk data into Azure Data Explorer for analytics use cases. And so now you're using KQL, they're integrated, and you can query large data sets for analytics value. And you can also have some customers that are actually creating alerts in Azure Data Explorer that then send events over into Sentinel. And so you get a nicely integrated solution that gives you exactly what you're talking about: first-class detection, first-class user analytics, first-class analytic behavior, especially incident response and threat hunt with Azure Data Explorer, and you're able to maintain your retention at the lowest possible price point in Azure Blob. And so you get a range of value there and flexibility. And that's just something I really appreciate, and I found our customers appreciate it a lot too. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense to me. I mean, I've focused a lot on, as compliance from a Department of Defense perspective, or even on an auditing perspective, and then from a SOC operations perspective. I might be a little dated 5 years ago, but a lot of that data would not provide us the context that we
Right.
needed, right? You and I know we've spoken in the past, use cases and context, right? That's really what security practitioners need to focus on. What workloads are we going to protect and why? What's the threat profile, and how do we do real threat modeling,
Right.
right? And some of those tools are being lost. But I think a lot of that, some organizations might not be applying that as they should because they don't have that visibility. Right,
Right.
the knowns, the unknowns, or the known unknowns, right, or the unknown unknowns. That's the trick, right? Because everybody has multiple departments, or even seeing beyond those departments. So, I think it's very, very important today for us to be able to get to the needle in the haystack, right? Find that
Exactly.
specific signal. And we didn't have we I don't believe we should have data that is focused on analytics in our SIEM per se. So it's nice to see a lot of that transitioning. Of course, we're seeing tons of those workloads coming over to Microsoft Sentinel with our integration, of course, with our unified XDR to do all of that compute, and then our Defender for Cloud Apps does all the UEBA and all of that alerting that we've worked with in the past. I'd love to see a little more. Do you have any information, or any slides you can show me on how that flow would work from a Cribl perspective into Sentinel?
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
would be cool to see.
All right, let's share. Let's see if I can get this to work.
Yeah, we do. We have lots of customers that are doing that migration, more and more from other platforms, which has been really great to see, the whole one Microsoft discussion. So yeah, no, this is great.
Right. And hopefully you see slides.
I do. Looks
Very
good.
good. I appreciate it. Yeah, and so the idea, and so there's a couple of fundamental issues with Cribl, with Cribl that we try to solve the reality of data growth and also the confusion. Data is coming from everywhere, and I think this is something I'm sure you're familiar with. Even customers that are moving to Sentinel have data in Azure, but they have data in other places too. And so where your data is coming from, it can be very confusing to maintain. It's very confusing to maintain and a lot of data. And so typically seeing 20, 28% data growth year over year, but your budgets are growing, 8%, 5% at best. And it creates a real gap in, being able to address your issues, being able to maintain your posture because your data is growing much faster than your data sources. And that's why it's so important to have more control. And so the slide we're seeing right now is just the messiness of collecting data. And we also spoke of the volume of data. So the idea with Cribl our main flagship product is we put Cribl Stream in the middle between your sources and destinations. So now you have clear view of your data. So think you have a data plane, all the data from your environment's passing through. So now you can control it, you can see it, you can monitor it, you can manage it. That idea that I can take example for firewall data. Firewall data has multiple use cases well beyond security. So I can share it, say to an Azure Analytics workspace so my firewall team can troubleshoot firewall issues, but I can also send bits and pieces over into Azure Data Explorer into Sentinel for security use cases. I can share uh, standard Windows logging. I can share external data. It gives you complete control. And I think that's the thing I want to emphasize so much because I think from an IT team's perspective, you're just data's coming at you. You feel like you got to take it, but you don't have a lot of control over it. And so now I can decide, all right, I'm going to drive this use case out of Sentinel for a detection, but I'm going to drive my DNS logging, for example, over into Azure Data Explorer. So every 30 minutes, I'm going to run an alert looking for a notable event in my DNS logging, say like a command and control ping. Then I'm going to create an alert over in Sentinel. So now I have a set of integrated responses, and I don't have to make that terrible decision of saying, I can't afford to do this, so I have to have less data. Now I have options where I can, with a cost-effective manner, I can take in all my data and make smart decisions with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it really does. One thing that I really like about this is that you said we can take pieces of the log, right? So if you have a compliance requirement that you need to collect, okay, what exactly do I need to collect for how long? And we can just get that snippet or that log source or that destination. I think that would be, very, very helpful. And then, just moving datas around, right? Just being very, very quickly and nimble, giving you that flexibility to say, okay, I need eyes in my SIEM on this now, right? What maybe it's a new business you acquire or a new technology. I think that definitely increases security for sure.
Especially with your especially in healthcare, high trust is not going to get any easier, and so you
Right,
need to be able to retain different pieces of data for dramatically different time periods. And so you have your basic logging, but then you have your access logging, medical device logging. So now you have the ability to say, okay, this type of data meets this requirement, so we're going to put it in this Azure blob space. We're going to put this data here. We're going to put this data here. So now, when for compliance, for audit, you now have a very clear path to understand where my data is. I can put a lifecycle policy in those buckets, and I'm maintaining that data exactly how I'm required to. A lot of organizations, because of the issues with separating data, are forced to save all the data in the same way, which increases cost and starts to cause issues because when you need to find that data, it's really hard to find. And so just
right.
that rate of efficiency. And just imagine, when you're running a SOC, you're having an incident, you need data. You can't wait. You can't wait, hours and days for the data to be found, manually restored. But with Cribl Stream, there's this wonderful feature called Replay, which allows you to go into the right Azure blob space, pull that data, and put it over to Sentinel.
That is an IR dream. I worked IR for years, right? That would be an IR dream to go back and just replay that log data or that any of that data on demand. Very, very, very cool.
I have customers, so I just before I move on to the next, I have a customer. This incredible story. They were telling me that in order to restore data back to their SIM for an IR incident, it would cost them about 6 figures, and it would take about 2 weeks. And could you imagine being in the middle of an incident and having to wait 2 weeks before you could resolve the incident? I mean, that would just that's horrifying.
Okay, absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to the next. So now I want to kind of give you an overall issue, overall view of the Cribl ecosystem of managing your data. The whole idea is being able to get data from anywhere to anywhere, and all these pieces are just think of building blocks. You don't have to use them, but we give you the options of doing what makes sense for your business. So Cribl Stream in the middle, which is the idea that I can get data from anywhere to anywhere. And then we have Cribl Search, which has been really interesting lately because Cribl Search gives you the ability to search raw data in your object storage. So now I don't even have to necessarily move data out of my object storage. This is very common where we'll have customers that'll have massive amounts of data in Azure Blob for, say, Azure audit logs, and they're keeping their retention, but the data costs too much to move it. So we give them the ability to search that data in place. We actually have another customer who's an Azure customer, but they also use AWS. And so they had an issue where they had something like 700 terabytes of data of CloudTrail data in their S3 bucket, but they needed to solve a problem that was in their SIEM in Azure. And so what we did was with Cribl Search was they could go into their CloudTrail bucket, find that event they needed. Instead of having to move hundreds of terabytes of data, they were able to move a few hundred megs of data using Cribl Search and Stream over into Sentinel in order to solve their problem. And so it gave them that flexibility to find what they needed to solve their problem, do it on demand, and be cost effective. Does that make sense?
It really does. No, that's great. And as from a security perspective, looking at this would definitely be something that customers need from a CNAP perspective, multi-cloud perspective with our Defender for Cloud. Now, let me ask you this. It's been a little while. I have worked with Cribl in the past, just so the audience knows. But one thing I really liked was the sources, where I could easily go and set up my own parsing. Let's say, for example, I have a new IoT vendor that comes out. I want to get visibility into that data quickly. Has anything been updated with that interface, or how do we get sources quickly into our SIM?
Right, and it's even better. So we have, I think we're at 45 sources, and we have a whole series where you could build your own set of sources as well. The idea is
Mm-hmm.
that we want to be able to onboard almost any kind of data as quickly as possible. I particularly love the REST collector interface that you can build a REST collector to pull data from anything, and then manage exactly how you want it and send that data somewhere. So it just makes the data collection process trivially easy in comparison to how I might have had to do it before. Let me just give you an idea. And so this is when I first adopted Cribl in 2018. It was taking us a few weeks in order to get data into our SIM. Once we had Cribl in place, we were able to get that down to a few hours. And so we didn't have to deal with long backlogs anymore. And also our data quality went up. So now when you're running queries in your SIM, you're able to find what you needed. The right fields are populated. And then especially having enrichment was very, very powerful. It was really really mind blowing, the idea of being able to do enrichment on ingest. So now I'm able to set the context of the event as close as possible to when it was created. So now that also made my threat intel more effective as well. And that's the thing. At the end of the day, less data doesn't solve security problems; it's better data solves security problems. So that was a real fundamental thing for me.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I've run so many investigations and just different alerts and SOC activities where that context was missing. We really don't know. Is this a big breach, or is this really an admin that we hired in, from the HR department, right? That context is becoming more and more prevalent, which is great from a security perspective, but it is that speed. I still have many customers coming to me saying, yeah, Ben, we bought this business years ago. We did this merger years ago. Oh, I don't really know what's going on that side of the business. Well, really, from base security principles, if you don't know what your attack surface is, you don't know anything.
Right.
To take a Game of Thrones a parlance, you know nothing, Jon Snow, right? We really don't know if you're not
Yeah.
sure,
I mean, yeah,
yeah.
M&As are even worse. I mean, and that's the thing is it's a lot like being married. It may not be your fault, but it is your problem. And you have to get visibility into these organizations in order to be proactive defense, but also for response. And that having that compatibility layer with Stream in M&A use cases is invaluable because now I can take whatever data is in the acquisition, pointed at Stream, and now I can change that data to transform it into my common framework for security. So typically, it's like 18 to 24 months is fairly common for M&A integrations. We aim to get that down to about 90 to about 180 days. And so it's very transformational in terms of risk and also just getting visibility.
Yeah, when I hear these things and I talk to people, I often mention island hopping attacks. One of the largest retail breaches that I ever worked from an IR perspective was all done from an HVAC vendor, right? It was an island hopping attack. So if you don't know what's there and you have no visibility into it, you are just wildly exposed. And, that's the first step, I believe, is really getting that attack surface under control.
Exactly. And then also understanding where your data is coming from. For example, I've had very similar set of use cases where so the control systems for the HVAC and the like we had the VPN for just that exact same use case. We had all that data tagged. So we knew that if that data was coming in over that particular VPN, who it
Nice.
was, where it was coming from, what the user was. So it was blindingly obvious that this data should not be here. And so once you see that tagging in place and that enrichment, that goes back to that better data is what solves problems.
Absolutely.
It's really a big deal. And finally, we got a new product called Cribl Lake that I'm really excited about. And the idea of the Cribl Lake is it's not trying to solve a commercial data lakehouse space of like Azure Data Explorer or Snowflake or Databricks. The idea about Cribl Lake is a lot of teams need to use object storage for compliance, for support, for various use cases. But they just don't have the skills to build the infrastructure, to manage the infrastructure, or secure the infrastructure. So the idea behind Cribl Lake is to make it to push button to say, you push a button, you now have storage. You now have an easy to use UI for security, for IAM, for data lifecycle management. So just tries to get the friction out of the way. So now security teams can get access to the types of tooling that they need to have.
That is great.
All right, so let's go on the next slide. So let's just talk about some of the typical use cases. You talk about SIEM migration. That's a really big one, especially these days. We have vendors that are selling off their SIEM practices. We have vendors that are consolidating. And so just the general idea is change. And so customers, they want better options. I mean, I have one customer who made a great video of how he was using Cribl to test 6 SIEMs at a time. And so what the
Wow.
process that would have taken him a year, because he had Cribl in place, he could send the data that he wanted to all these different security tools. He could evaluate them with his data, and it shortened the decision-making process by many months. And so now he knew what he wanted. And then because everything was already set up, we're able to make a few small changes, and now all of his data is flowing into his new SIEM. They did the migration I previously talked about, and he was with almost no risk. He was able to choose a SIEM and migrate to a SIEM. And so for this particular CISO, it was just win-win all the way around.
Yeah, that sounds great. Getting that data in there like that to be able to make a real A/B comparison, not just with test dummy data.
Yeah, it's such a huge problem because typically you're taking your dev data and you're putting a small data set of a few 10, 20 servers, and it's just not the same data. It's not realistic. And so it's
Right.
hard to make a POV out of that, much less an A/B comparison.
And just really, as just you and I having this conversation, really I see this as a huge value for multi-cloud. Anybody, we have wonderful analytics with our Defender for Cloud. We can provide security for other clouds, other solutions. We have, of course, our own, K8 solution, Defender for containers. But I always get asked, how do I get all of my data there? What am I going to send, right? What should I send? What's the most effective data that should collect and save where, right? So I think this partnership with Cribl and Microsoft is going to be very powerful for our customers that want that flexibility, that context, that cost savings, and to be able to move at the speed of AI, right? That's what we're looking at today.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something I'm seeing more and more. I mean, so many companies are multi-cloud, whether they want to be or not, through acquisition or just, they're operating. And and more often than not, all three major clouds. And so they're producing an enormous amounts of fundamental data, flow logs, access logs, audit logs. It's almost to the point where that data has to stay, because it's so big, it has to stay in the originating cloud. And so one of the things we do with customers with Stream is we use Stream to filter through that data, looking for that 0.005% of data that they need for detections, and then they push that into their SIEM. And so that way, when that they have the detection data and they have access to the raw data when and if they need it. And so it just helps answer a lot of questions and be cost effective. I mean, we're working with a customer right now, 25% of their entire SIEM budget is dedicated toward cloud access logs that don't really
Mhm.
particularly need to be there. I mean, we did some analytics and we're seeing that they're maybe searching that data 100 times a day, and less than 1% is actually in scope for what they need. So by moving that out of there, they now freed up capacity of 25% of their SIM, and now they don't have to buy, they don't have to buy more capacity. And so it just helps solve a lot of problems.
It does, and it really, I keep stressing to, my customers and my friends and colleagues that pick my brain about these things is that as AI is there to empower us today, right? From everything from, when we're doing Word documents to coding with Copilot for GitHub, are the threat actors are doing the same thing. The
Sure.
types of attacks are becoming much more sophisticated. So I ask questions like, are you collecting data on your DNS? Are you really looking at DNS, exfil? Are you looking at zone transfers? That's a very prevalent attack. Are we really looking at, so take your resources and look at those more sophisticated attacks that you might not have had to have done or you might not have had included in your program yet, because why? You really need to.
Right. I mean, one of the big ways I was able to buy Cribl originally was DNS logging. Had an enormous
Oh,
amount
okay. I
of
didn't know that.
DNS logging. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
and and we needed that help to find. We needed help to find that less than 1% of data that mattered, and so we were able to collect that data with a few simple rules. We were able to exclude the data we didn't need. And here's the best part: because I could manage the data and send the same data to multiple places. We didn't lose the retention on that data. So and for retention, we put it in object storage. But we stripped it away. We got down to that 1% that mattered. We enriched it. And now we saw all sorts of security value because we took away the 99%, this massive data set that just wasn't particularly useful. And that way it revealed that 1% that was. And so it created this very rich telemetry that it helped solve a lot of problems. And I think it helped our security team so much.
It really does. And when we're talking to our customers about the value of the Microsoft and Cribl partnership, the ROI really does also go to that cost savings of time, of course. It's not just the flexibility and the insurance of lowering risk, but it's also that cost savings of time. One of the projects I worked with before I started working with Cribl, I was writing my own parsers and doing my own regex all day. And I was a very senior resource to be doing that. I didn't mind doing it, but I often thought, it's probably better, my better use of my time doing more strategic things or actually doing more threat hunting to look for specific new attacks, right? So to be able to leverage your people better, you need to be able to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's painful. And that's what one of the things I loved about having Cribble was I was able to shift about 50% of my admin time over into getting value from data. Because you look at it when you at a fundamental standpoint, the cost of your security tools, especially your SIM, is getting the data, storing the data. And unfortunately, most teams spend the vast majority of the time there. You don't spend nearly enough time getting value from your data. And so now that you can make the collecting data, shipping data, all that effort go away, you can now shift your people over to getting value. And it was very transformative.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is amazing. I did lose you on the camera, though. You
Cameron
might have
just
moved
died.
out.
Well, you'll just have the dulcet tones of my voice.
No problem. No problem.
There we go. Hey, so just to kind of rounded out. And the idea is to give you that flexibility. And just so you want to use, and teams really enjoy using Sentinel and Azure Data Explorer together. So give that power to use that data and get data from anywhere to where you need it to be. And just having that flexibility, I think, is just very, very powerful. And it's just, it helps things get things done, improves your security posture, and get better value from, and I really appreciate the platforms that Azure's put together, especially Sentinel and Azure Data Explorer, two of my favorites, because we do so much with the data. And just another thing, for
Yeah.
example, we have a lot of customers who deploy endpoint for Defender. They'll put that data on an event hub, but they're using a third-party SIEM. We use Cribl to pull all the endpoint for Defender data off of event hub, transform it, and ship it over to a third-party SIEM. So
Mhm.
it creates that easy to use integration to help keep solving problems and getting in value.
I was happy to hear about Microsoft's partnership with Cribl. I think it's off to a amazing start. I think I have a lot of customers that are asking for this kind of help with migration from one SIM to another, or migrations, really moving into Sentinel, multi-cloud. Ed, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to me about just all of this. I always enjoy talking to you. Will you come back again and have another one of these here with me in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's definitely focus on high trust, because I think there's a lot of value here for high trust. Talk about that for your customers and your practice in particular. But thank you. It's always love chatting. It's a privilege to share. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Until next time.
Thank you.